Law 3, Part 2, use smoke screens to disguise your actions. Deception is always the best strategy, but the best deceptions require a screen of smoke to distract people's attention from your real purpose. The bland exterior, like the unreadable poker face, is often the perfect smoke screen, hiding your intentions behind the comfortable and familiar. If you lead the sucker down a familiar path, he won't catch on when you lead him into a trap. Observance of the law. In 1910, Mr. Sam Beazle of Chicago sold his warehouse business for close to $1 million. He settled down to semi-retirement and the managing of his many properties, but deep inside, he itched for the old days of deal-making. One day, a young man named Joseph Weil visited his office, wanting to buy an apartment he had up for sale. Beazle explained the terms. The price was $8,000, but he only required a down payment of $2,000. Weil said he would sleep on it, but he came back the following day and offered to pay the full $8,000 in cash if Beazle could wait a couple of days until a deal Weil was working on came through. Even in semi-retirement, a clever businessman like Beazle was curious as to how Weil would be able to come up with so much cash, roughly $150,000 today, so quickly. Weil seemed reluctant to say, and quickly changed the subject, but Beazle was persistent. Finally, after assurances of confidentiality, Weil told Beazle the following story. The king of Israel Ein's worship of the Then Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much more. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, and all his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. But Jehu did it with cunning in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu ordered, Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it, and Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. And they entered the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. Then Jehu went into the house of Baal. And he said to the worshippers of Baal, Search and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal. Then he went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside, and said, The man who allows any of those whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life. So as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the officers, Go in and slay them, let not a man escape. So when they put them to the sword, the guard and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal, and they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal and burned it. And they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. Old Testament, 2 Kings 10:18-28. Weil's uncle was the secretary to a coterie of multi-millionaire financiers. These wealthy gentlemen had purchased a hunting lodge in Michigan 10 years ago at a cheap price. They had not used the lodge for a few years, so they had decided to sell it and had asked Weil's uncle to get whatever he could for it. For good reasons of his own, the uncle had been nursing a grudge against the millionaires for years. This was his chance to get back at them. He would sell the property for $35,000 to a set-up man whom it was Weil's job to find. The financiers were too wealthy to worry about this low price. The set-up man would then turn around and sell the property again for its real price, around $155,000. The uncle, Weil, and the third man would split the profits from this second sale. It was all legal, and for a good cause, the uncle's just retribution. Beazle had heard enough. He wanted to be the set-up buyer. Weil was reluctant to involve him, but Beazle would not back down. The idea of a large profit, plus a little adventure, had him champing at the bit. Weil explained that Beazle would have to put up the $35,000 in cash to bring the deal off. Beazle, a millionaire, said he could get the money with a snap of his fingers. Weil finally relented and agreed to arrange a meeting between the uncle Beazle and the financiers in the town of Galesburg, Illinois. On the train ride to Galesburg, Beazle met the uncle, an impressive man, with whom he avidly discussed business. Weil also brought along a companion, a somewhat paunchy man named George Gross. Weil explained to Beazle that he himself was a boxing trainer, that Gross was one of the promising prize fighters he trained, and that he had asked Gross to come along to make sure the fighter stayed in shape. For a promising fighter, Gross was an impressive looking. He had gray hair and a beer belly, but Beazle was so excited about the deal that he didn't really think about the man's flabby appearance. Once in Galesburg, Weil and his uncle went to fetch the financiers while Beazle waited in a hotel room with Gross, who promptly put on his boxing trunks. As Beazle half-watched, Gross began to shadow box. Distracted as he was, Giesel ignored how badly the boxer wheezed after a few minutes of exercise, although his style seemed real enough. An hour later, Weil and his uncle reappeared with the financiers, an impressive, intimidating group of men all wearing fancy suits. The meeting went well, and the financiers agreed to sell the lodge to Giesel, who had already had the $35,000 wired to a local bank. This minor business now settled, the financiers sat back in their chairs and began to banter about high finance, throwing out the name J.P. Morgan as if they knew the man. Finally, one of them noticed the boxer in the corner of a room. Weil explained what he was doing there. The financier counted that he too had a boxer in his entourage, whom he named. Weil laughed brazenly and exclaimed that his man could easily knock out their man. The conversation escalated into an argument. In the heat of passion, Weil challenged the men to a bet. The financiers eagerly agreed and left to get their man ready for a fight the next day. As soon as they had left, the uncle yelled at Weil right in front of Giesel. They did not have enough money to bet with, and once the financiers discovered this, the uncle would be fired. Weil apologized for forgetting him in this mess, but he had a plan. He knew the other boxer well, and with a little bribe, they could fix the fight. But where would the money come from for the bet? The uncle replied, without it they were as good as dead. Finally, Giesel had heard enough. Unwilling to jeopardize his deal with any ill will, he offered his own $35,000 cash for part of the bet. Even if he lost that, he would wire for more money and still make a profit on the sale of the lodge. The uncle and nephew thanked him. With their own $15,000 and Giesel's $35,000, they would manage to have enough for the bet. That evening, as Giesel watched the two boxers rehearse the fix in the hotel room, his mind reeled at the killing he was going to take from both the boxing match and the sale of the lodge. The fight took place in a gym the next day. Weil handled the cash, which was placed for security in a locked box. Everything was proceeding as planned in the hotel room. The financiers were looking glum at how badly their fighter was doing, and Giesel was dreaming about the easy money he was about to make. Then suddenly the wild swing by the financiers' fighter hit Gross hard in the face, knocking him down. When he hit the canvas, blood spurted from his mouth. He coughed, then lay still. One of the financiers, a former doctor, checked his pulse. He was dead. The millionaires panicked. Everyone had to get out before the police arrived and could all be charged with murder. Terrified, Giesel hightailed it out of the gym and back to Chicago, leaving behind his $35,000, which he was only too glad to forget, for it seemed a small price to pay to avoid being implicated in a crime. He never wanted to see Weil or any of the others again. After Giesel scurried out, Gross stood up under his own steam. The blood that had spurted from his mouth came from a ball filled with chicken blood and hot water that he had hidden in his cheek. The whole affair had been masterminded by Weil, better known as the Yellow Kid, one of the most creative artists in history. Weil split the $35,000 with the financiers and the boxers, all fellow con artists. A nice little profit for a few days' work. SN Broadthis means to create a front that eventually becomes imbued with an atmosphere or impression of familiarity, within which the strategist may maneuver unseen while all eyes are trained to see obvious familiarities. The 36 strategies, quoted in THF Japanese Art of War. Thomas Cleary, 1991 interpretation. The Yellow Kid had staked out Giesel as the perfect sucker long before he set up the con. He knew the boxing match scam would be the perfect ruse to separate Giesel from his money quickly and definitively. But he also knew that if he had begun by trying to interest Giesel in the boxing match, he would have failed miserably. He had to conceal his intentions and switch attention, create a smokescreen, in this case the sale of the lodge. On the train ride and in the hotel room, Giesel's mind had been completely occupied with the pending deal, the easy money, the chance to hobnob with wealthy men. He had failed to notice that Gross was out of shape and middle-aged at best. Such is the distracting power of a smokescreen. Engrossed in the business deal, Giesel's attention was easily diverted to the boxing match, but only at a point when it was already too late for him to notice the details that would have given Gross away. The match, after all, now depends on a bribe rather than on the boxer's physical condition, and Giesel was so distracted at the end by the illusion of the boxer's death that he completely forgot about his money. Learn from the Yellow Kid. The familiar, inconspicuous front is the perfect smoke screen. Approach your mark with an idea that seems ordinary enough, a business deal, financial intrigue. The sucker's mind is distracted, his suspicions allayed. That is when you gently guide him onto the second path, the slippery slope down which he slides helplessly into your trap. Observance of the law. In the mid-1920s, the powerful warlords of Ethiopia were coming to the realization that a young man of the nobility named Haile Selassie, also known as Rastafari, was outcompeting them all and nearing a point where he could proclaim himself their leader, unifying the country for the first time in decades. Most of his rivals could not understand how this wispy, quiet, mild-mannered man had been able to take control. Yet in 1927, Selassie was able to summon the warlords, one at a time, to come to Addis Ababa to declare their loyalty and recognize him as leader. Some hurried, some hesitated, but only one, Djismak Balka of Sidamo, dared defy Selassie totally. A blistery man, Balka was a great warrior, and he considered the new leader weak and unworthy. He pointedly stayed away from the capital. Finally, Selassie, in his gentle but stern way, commanded Balka to come. The warlord decided to obey, but in doing so he would turn the tables on this pretender to the Ethiopian throne. He would come to Addis Ababa at his own speed, and with an army of 10,000 men, a force large enough to defend himself, perhaps even start a civil war. Stationing this formidable force in a valley 3 miles from the capital, he waited as a king would. Selassie would have to come to him. Selassie did indeed send emissaries, asking Balka to attend an afternoon banquet in his honor. But Balka, no fool, knew history. He knew that previous kings and lords of Ethiopia had used banquets as a trap. Once he was there and full of drink, Selassie would have him arrested or murdered. To signal his understanding of the situation, he agreed to come to the banquet, but only if he could bring his personal bodyguards, 600 of his best soldiers, all armed and ready to defend him and themselves. To Balka's surprise, Selassie answered with the utmost politeness that he would be honored to play host to such warriors. On the way to the banquet, Balka warned his soldiers not to get drunk and to be on their guard. When they arrived at the palace, Selassie was his charming best. He deferred to Balka and treated him as if he desperately needed his approval and cooperation. But Balka refused to be charmed, and he warned Selassie that if he did not return to his camp by nightfall, his army had orders to attack the capital. Selassie reacted as if hurt by his mistrust. Over the meal, when it came time for the traditional singing of songs in honor of Ethiopia's leaders, he made a point of allowing only songs honoring the warlord of Sidamo. It seemed to Balka that Selassie was scared and intimidated by this great warrior who could not be outwitted. Sensing the change, Balka believed that he would be the one to call the shots in the days to come. At the end of the afternoon, Balka and his soldiers began their march back to camp amidst cheers and salutes. Looking back to the capital over his shoulder, he planned his strategy, how his own soldiers would march through the capital in triumph within weeks, and Selassie would be put in his place being either prison or death. When Balka came in sight of his camp, however, he saw that something was terribly wrong. Where before there had been colorful tents stretching as far as they could see, now there was nothing, only smoke from doused fires. What devil's magic was this? A witness told Balka what had happened. During the banquet, a large army, commanded by an ally of Selassie's, had stolen up on Balka's encampment by a side route he had not seen. This army had not come to fight, however, knowing that Balka would have heard a noisy battle and hurried back with his 600-man bodyguard. Selassie had armed his own troops with baskets of gold and cash. They had surrounded Balka's army and proceeded to purchase every last one of their weapons. Those who refused were easily intimidated. Within a few hours, Balka's entire force had been disarmed and scattered in all directions. Realizing his danger, Balka decided to march south with his 600 soldiers to regroup, but the same army that had disarmed his soldiers blocked his way. The other way out was to march on the capital, but Selassie had set up a large army to defend it. Like a chess player, he had predicted Balka's moves and had cheated him. For the first time in his life, Balka surrendered. To repent his sins of pride and ambition, he agreed to enter a monastery.